All right, brilliant. And yeah, so just to start off with, I wonder if you could just talk a bit about your own interest in this field of language and how it affects how people think and how you came into this field, please.
Well, my main area of training is language, psycholinguistics, psychology of language, and broader cognitive science. So I really grew up from a very young age, sort of being like language is my main area in the psychological sciences and linguistics. I mean, obviously I studied a lot of linguistics too. So about late, 1999 or so, I just kind of almost hit on by accident this whole phenomenon of how for bilinguals, I was studying bilingualism because the great thing about multilingualism is it just brings into such interesting focus the interaction of culture and language, all these issues, sort of like complex dynamical system of how so much affects, like the triangulation, culture, cognition, thought, is a very fertile arena in which to play and discover. So I'm trying to say I came upon this kind of sort of discovery sort of by accident, because I had a multicultural team of, my lab had people from many different backgrounds. And we had this little incident where basically my postdoc was saying, we were always kind of playing around with her, like, when this other grad student of mine would like try to tease her by making double entendres or jokes. And then it was, the funny thing is she wouldn't understand them. Okay. So haha, it's kind of like, kind of just silly stuff. And at one point she said, she laughed, like she got it. We're like, wow, you got that, Aisha. She said, I can tell a sex joke in English, but I cannot tell a sex joke in Turkish. Wow. You could tell, you can tell a sex joke in English, but you can't tell it in Turkish. And there's so much going on there. And we kind of hit upon this idea of, wow, in your foreign language, phrases don't feel as emotional. And that became the centerpiece of my research. Starting, I didn't publish till 2003 because one never publishes right away. Yeah. But I published a paper that's become kind of seminal. And it's part of this sort of unleashed this. I mean, other people working on this too. I'm saying I was the only psychologist who was working on it. Linguists had always noted, oh yeah, the foreign language doesn't feel as emotional. I was the person that in the laboratory used skin conductance, electrodermal activity, to show that when bilinguals listen to phrases in their foreign language, they had when they listened to emotional phrases like taboo words and childhood reprimands, when they listened to taboo words and childhood reprimands in their foreign language, they had reduced skin conductance compared to hearing those childhood reprimands and not so much taboo phrases, but mostly childhood reprimands. They had reduced skin conductance to childhood reprimands in their foreign language.
Yes.
Intuitively, this makes sense. And in fact, people after, during debriefing, this was done with Turkish, English bilinguals, Turkish sojourners and immigrants who were living in the US as adults. Like one man said to me, oh yeah, in Turkish, I hear that phrase, some kind of equivalent of like a reprimand, like don't do that. Like in English, we use go to your room. They don't really have that in Turkish, but they have equivalents. He said, I would hear my aunt saying it. Yeah. Like he had the autobiographical memory and he could hear the full auditory and feel an emotion. Whereas in a foreign language, you kind of just laugh at some of those things. Okay. Yes, now, taboo, a lot of people, I've studied taboo words quite a bit, and taboo words are definitely rated as less intense in the foreign language. With skin conductance, it wasn't as big a difference. So these foreigners living in the US, they still got a skin conductance reaction to English taboo words. And I think that makes sense because they do use them. They've been living here on an average of 5 years. So there's this whole idea of getting exposed. So our theory, or my theory, is kind of common sense, like a lot of theories have to be. Someone's got to put a theory on it. I call it the context of learning hypothesis. And the idea is that language, phrases, and sentences, words, accrue emotional resonances when they are learned and used in emotional contexts.
Yes.
So
yes,
when a
yeah.
language is foreign, it doesn't have any emotional stuff on it. Kind of like kids on the playground when we're growing up used to say, "Oh, do you know how to say shit in French? Merde. Ha 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 ha."
Yeah.
It's plain.
Yes. Yeah.
So I could talk a lot more about that because that's my expertise, but that is the way, that's sort of part of the reason I was asked to, the Scientific American editor has asked me to write a couple things over the years. First, I wrote more about my own work, the emotion and language. I mean, I've only written 3 papers for them because you don't really have time, but so I read about the whole debate going on over the idea that people make different decisions when using their foreign language. So it's the trolley car dilemma. Would you push the man off a bridge in order to stop a speeding trolley? That kind of thing. And people are more willing to be utilitarian in their foreign language. And I have a whole series. Yeah.
Sorry, you were saying, yeah.
People are more willing to take a utilitarian response when they're asked about that moral dilemma in their foreign language.
Yes, yeah.
The big line of, and I just heard a whole talk on this. There's actually the woman I sent you sent you that abstract from like 2000 by Viorica Marian, where she answers a lot of these questions right in the abstract. She has a book out called The Power of Language, where she really takes on all these topics, and it's a popular science book. And I actually just heard a Zoom. I went to a Zoom event where she presented her book. Although what's in her book, I mean, it's a popular book, so it's just bringing together everything that those of us in the field have been studying for a long time. She does a really good job, though. She really explains everything well. So how I got to write the article that you read. So I had been writing about my own area, and the editors asked me to review, write popular science version of the articles I discuss about in that paper. I don't really talk about my own research in the paper that you found.
No. So just in broad terms, if how would you say language does act as a filter or an enhancer on how people think, and not necessarily so much first language and foreign language, but just different first languages, if you like.
Oh, like different dialects or different stances, different registers, different, like the different personae that we might be, like if we're interacting with a clerk at a shop versus our intimate person. I had a way I was going to get into that. Well, I'm just going to start off. I just want to contrast this with kind of the old view, which is also kind of a naive and first take on things, like you've never really thought about it before. And there's truth to the old view. The old view is that it's like language is a dictionary, like a code. You just, you look up, your brain has the meaning, you look up the word for that meaning, you put that word out. That language is simply a mental algebra. And this idea was very, very strongly advocated by Chomsky back at the beginning of the cognitive revolution in 1957 to 65. He really took this intuition, there's truth to it, that language is just a vehicle. It is simply a vehicle. It is a code, like mental algebra. Like with algebra, it doesn't matter which symbol you use. Numbers are we know how numbers work. There's no meaning to numbers, right?
Yes,
so there really was this view that this is kind of what language is. And anyone who talked about this other stuff, like, oh, something feels more emotional in one language than the other, depending, like scientists would be like, that's silly. Like a man on the street might even say that, like the merit example I gave you, or people say, you know, isn't like a woman who immigrated from South America would say, you know, she's more fluent in English now, but she only prays in Spanish because praying in English doesn't feel right. That's the play money idea. The man on the street has had these intuitions that languages carry meaning, but the scientific view was really, it's just a vehicle. Do you get it? So when I came along and sort of the other people around me, like Pavlenko and Mark Diwali, were starting to say that a foreign language doesn't feel as emotional, I was rejected from 3 journals.
Oh, wow.
Back in the early 2000s, right? Now they say my paper is seminal, but you know, that's really tough because people are like, no, language is a vehicle. It's not changing. And then when the decision-making stuff hit the fan, I had done some of that, but hadn't published it because it was too hard to understand. But then other people published on the trolley dilemmas. So there is this whole backdrop of this idea, no, language is a vehicle, it's not carrying emotion. Okay, so let's get back to sort of now the modern view, fast forward decades, now it is widely accepted that language is, can influence your decision-making. You can feel like a different person. I know that's the bilingualism, like famously the bilingualism person, people say they feel like a different person. So I'm just going to use the bilingual example, but then I'll try to translate it to where this happens in monolingualism. So the idea is that, you know, our brains are these neural networks. They're constantly extracting patterns from the environment, making connections, changing neural firings. And as you learn a new language, like as you learn and use a new language, the vocabulary and the grammar is getting tied up with the context in which you say that, and it becomes automatic. The context in which you use language gets stored with the actual phrases.
Yes.
So to give you an example, one of my students, an international student from China, came to my office to ask me how to help her write that well, first she started out by saying, you know, can you write a letter of recommendation for me to win an award? Yes. But I wanted to help her. So she actually admitted she had to write her own statement about why she deserved the reward. We all do that, right? And this was really hard for her because she couldn't promote herself, because in Chinese culture, you have a humility pressure not to boast about yourself. And so she would find this very difficult. And so this might be a case where you could actually even write in your foreign language, you could boast about yourself better because American culture allows one to boast about oneself. So when you're writing in English, it starts getting really easy to find. So one question I have is like, what's the mechanism? I think in English, we even see 2 things are going. One, we have more access to phrases like, oh, I'm the best. Like, here's another example with languages. If you give people the 20 questions, a 20 questions item, it's like, you're going to write 20 statements about yourself. Americans tend to start with I and describe characteristics, stuff like their abilities and everything. And in a collectivist culture, like in East Asia, you might start talking about your family and friends and who you are. You're this person's daughter or son or the club you belong to, and you talk about other people more. Okay, so that's an example how cultures, because cultures have different values, then they influence the message we want to say. When we are told to speak in one language versus another, that language brings us into that culture and starts activating all the cultural expectations. Like if you're going to speak in Chinese to your teachers or authority figures, you're going to go in there into the position of humility. Once you're told to speak in English, it activates that framework. Now, I think you asked me about monolingualism. This is more general than just first language, second language, or dominant language, most proficient language. It does tie into the different registers that we're in. You know, how do we talk at work versus the home? It's the thing about the different language is it just is stronger. It's so strong. This becoming a different person is strong because different languages usually go with different cultures, and cultures can be different. Whereas how different is the culture of work versus the culture of home? Yeah, if they're very different, then when you're at work, the language of work then is going to start activating different patterns. Like once you see the language of work, it starts activating different patterns.
Yes, yes, yeah.
I think that once you start using a language, it activates all the neural networks, memories, values that have gone along with that language. See, do you remember that what's called the modularity of thought? This is a scientific idea going back to Jerry Fodor in the 60s and 70s and 80s, where there was this hypothesis that different abilities are modular and separate from each other. So language is its own mental module. Chomsky really pushed that idea. Emotion is separate. Cognition is separate. Different cognitive abilities are separate. And we don't believe that anymore. We really believe that everything it's called the embodied view, embodiment. That idea has been around since really in the 90s, but even before that, but it really got strong in the 90s, that when we experience things, it affects other things that we're doing at the same time. Experience is not modular, it's embodied. So different experiences can affect us, and we just have to accept that. Like we have, like this explains a lot. Like if you want to explain, like going through grad school or taking on a certain job, by the end of it, you're going to be changed. You are going to be very different because you spent those 5 years like learning what academia is about. And at the end of it, you talk like that and you are like that.
Yes, yeah.
People, they're going to keep it separate. Like they say, oh, I'm going to go take this job because it makes money, but I'm not going to be co-opted. I'm like, think again. I mean, yes, bravo, you don't want to be co-opted, but it's all going on around you. How do you keep yourself? How strong can you be? You're enacting all those things. It's going to change you.
Yes, yeah. Oh, great. I think you've explained it in a way I think that the general reader will really be able to understand. Thank you. That's really helpful. And just got my list of questions. Yeah. So yes, I wonder if you could talk a bit more about, say, bilingualism and how people have these different personalities, please, when they're speaking different languages.
Well, that's really what I was just going over. Like when I gave the example of writing the self-promotional essay, that as you start speaking another language, it cues your brain. Your brain goes to that part where different autobiographical memories are stored, and it starts bringing you into that value system. It activates that value system.
Yes, yeah.
Like some things are just hard to say. It can be hard to say certain statements unless you have a lot of practice in them. Like I can't say swear words easily, whereas my son does it shockingly, right?
Yes,
I can't say them. Not or like, here's another example. Like I hear these new phrases that the Gen Z uses because I'm a college professor. I'm around young people. They can even tell me the phrases they say. And some of them are like, I just can't say that. I just not my, that's just, I don't have any practice with that. It doesn't even feel right to me. Like, for example, their phrases, they're like, I had a couple good ones that I couldn't say. Like here's silly. In the US, the young people love to say absolutely. Like, okay, it's actually really kind of cool from a linguistic standpoint that there are different ways to say yes and no.
Yes.
You may hear, oh, the culture has 10 ways to say yes. And you're like, that's weird, isn't there? No, well, America, English, British English, US, it has 10, 15 ways to say yes. Sure, of course, okay, all that stuff. And they each have their subtle different contexts in which they're appropriate. Like you can debate, well, what does sure mean? Sure is a little bit of a meaning, well, I wouldn't have, that's maybe not what I would have wanted to do, but yeah, I'll go along with it. And then the younger generation has used this phrase, absolutely. I don't say absolutely. It's just absolutely. That's not, I understand it. I don't use it.
Yes, yeah. And I wonder if you could talk a bit about color, please, and how language affects how people perceive colors and yes,
Oh,
if yeah, please.
yeah. Well, I mean, this is language and color was the famous example of researchers like going back to the mid 20th century, the anthropologists, the anthropological linguists, Berlin and Kay and those guys. And they the reason it had such a big impact because when you look at, okay, it just blew away. These linguists, these early anthropological linguists were just blown away. They were doing that 20th century thing of going and looking at obscure hidden cultures and languages, documenting them, and they were blown away that a language could have so few words for color. Like at the extreme, there are languages that only have like a word for dark and light. And then what's so shocking and beautiful is there's a regular progression. If you have 3 colors, you'll add in red. Then if you have 4 colors, you add in, I don't want to, I haven't looked it up lately, but there's this regular sequence. And then of course we know the colors, purple is added very late. And actually it's really interesting. Just gonna, okay, I'm on a roll. So
Yeah.
English, our language, has added purple very late. And one reason we know it has is, what do we call purple grapes? We call them red grapes. What do we call that onion that's a purple color? We call it red onion.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
English used to not have purple and we call those things red.
Wow, gosh. Extraordinary, yes, yeah.
So it is a lot of fun. So now, why do, I mean, this is kind of obvious, but I'm just going to kind of keep going. Why do some cultures, I mean, it's actually not so obvious. It's a little bit shocking. If you think that language is just a vehicle, it is a little bit shocking. Why would some languages only have like 2 or 3 words for color? Because honestly, they don't need it.
Yes,
They're
yeah.
rural, usually in hunter-gatherer tribes. They don't need a full panoply of colors. Now in the modern world with artificial dyes, we're getting colors like cerulean, pick your magenta, we can really start adding in these even like funny, you can make fun of these color labels now that manufacturers come up with, but we need them. We have them because we need them. They're serving a purpose.
Yes,
so when we look at language, the thing that I really enjoy about language is how language reveals culture. Like culture is there. Culture is, well, I have a definition which is a little unique, but culture is the solution to problems. Is culture, so when I teach cross-cultural psychology, I do ask my students, what is culture? And they want to say, oh, it's the beliefs and the values and the practices. I mean, yes, it is, but what's underneath it all? What causes these beliefs, values, and practices? It's to solve a problem. The problem is how to coordinate us as individual psychological beings that are looking after, have our own goals, our own fitness and reproductive goals. How do we coordinate individual goals with group goals in a specific context with a specific ecosystem and method of subsistence? So culture. So when we look at language, we can see, hey, the culture needed this word to do something that it wanted to do.
Yes, yeah. And you mentioned that, so you talked about some of the historical development of thought in the field, and I just wondered to what extent are those debates still going on about language being just a vehicle? Because I know I did contact another researcher. I've just got Dr. Betty Berner. I don't know, and she mentioned she referred me to a couple of books. One by Guy Deutscher, Through the Language Glass: Why the World Looks Different in Other Languages, and another one by John McWhorter, The Language Hoax: Why the World Looks the Same in Any Language. So are these, is it still, is one of these a fringe view, or are they both researchers still grappling with this issue?
Thanks for letting me to air in on my thoughts on this. the McWhorter language hooks, which I really do want to read it. I mean, I'm a little bit familiar with him, and I kind of actually enjoy a lot of his, he does podcasts and popular stuff, and his book's popular. So is it still a debate? It's just the thing I enjoy is everything's gotten more sophisticated. Like the debate when it began early 20th century with the Whorf hypothesis, it was just so like primitive. Like the question back then was, well, does language determine thought? Like you can't think something if your language doesn't have a way of expressing it. And that would be the sort of strong Whorfian view. I talk about this in my article, the one that you read in the beginning. That has been put aside. And to some extent, McWhorter's book is like repeating why why the world looks the same in every language. He's dismissing rightly that very strong Whorfian view. So when he says the world looks the same in every language, it's that he's getting at this idea, which, okay, I'm going to kind of restart a minute. The old view was very simplistic, as it had to be, because in every field you start off like knowing nothing, and you're like making these gross divisions to try to divide things up. And as science goes along, you get more and more sophisticated, obviously. So we're in a very different world. So is the debate still going on? Yes, but it's just gotten in a beautifully, wonderfully, much more sophisticated level. We're still there. It's not like the old debate. It's a new version of it where now it's more like shades of gray, and the two sides agree on so much. There's still, and the differences are minor. They might not personally feel they're minor. I mean, there's still stuff to argue about. So basically, do you see where I'm going with this? Like it's
Yes,
actually sort of beautiful how okay, so McWhorter it's like a glass half empty, glass half full type of thing. McWhorter is saying why the world looks the same in every language. We have human cognition. We have the same mental apparatus, and we can use that to look at the world and see things that speak to human nature. And that is true. And the other view is that, but culture is different, because you need to have different solutions. You remember the problem? Remember what culture is? You're making these solutions.
Yes.
But because there's different history, subsistence, and geography, and different needs, the culture is going to come up with different solutions. So famously, one big division is, and I don't think what I'm going to say now is, okay, researchers like to say a big division is safety versus threat. If you're growing up in a culture where there's huge amounts of threat, like the classic example from anthropology is like living on an atoll in the Pacific where you can be, so tsunamis could come. And in those societies, they're very what's called a tight society. And there's a book by Michelle, the famous and wonderful and amazing Michelle Gelfand, a cross-cultural psychologist. Her book is called Rule Breakers, Rule Makers. I use it in my class. She talks about tight cultures have to have they're very rule governed. I mean, classically, we can think of Japan, we can think a lot of East Asia, even Germany is kind of tight. The Europe and the West tends to be loose. Loose is where you privilege individualism, creativity, and innovation, and thinking outside the box, and so on. So loose cultures are less rule governed. Tight cultures are really, really tightly rule governed. And the explanation for tight versus loose is typically threat versus safety. If you are under threat, you need to have a lot of rules, because otherwise the tsunami, because you're not working together, you need to have people work together, cooperate. You can't think outside the box because that causes deaths, so on. So the piece I like to add is material wealth. In the West, we are so vastly wealthy. And the wealth is a wonderful thing because it's unleashed the ability to be so loose, so individualistic, so right. It's allowed, wealth has allowed us to have a moral reasoning where we can no child shall be killed at birth. I mean, just think of that. No child can be killed at birth. Why? Because you're so wealthy. There's foster families to adopt them. Whereas in many societies, if the parents are dead, you throw the kid into the grave with the parents, because unless there's family members. I mean, of course, family members want to, but if there's not, you got to kill that infant.
Yes.
So we are wealthy. We are so wealthy that we can't look at the world. We cannot see the same world that a hunter-gatherer living on that rocky atoll. So that's the view that would oppose Warcher, although I don't even know if, I mean, this is a lot of this is like my own, this is my own ruminations and everything. That's why I don't agree with McWhorter, because I'm part of the camp that says it's not even language, it's culture. See, the other thing, people get caught up with language, that you see it, you have a different language, you see a different world. I mean, of course, but it's really, you have a different culture, you're in a different world, and then a culture influences the language.
Yes, yes, yes.
Because language
Yeah.
is culture. Language does not cause things. Language is what culture produces as one of its tools to solve the problems. So in
Yes.
some cultures, yeah. So I am firmly on the culture influences, when we're from a different culture, we see a different world. But I do agree with the McWhorter point that there is a basic cognition, and that when you meet someone from a very different culture, you can talk through and meet them.
Yes, yeah.
The old view, the strict view, is that you can't. Like the old Dwarfian view is, oh, if your languages are different, you don't have the words to express it, you don't have the grammar to express it, you can't even conceive that thing. That view is gone.
Yes, yeah. All right. Oh, brilliant. Well, thank you very much indeed, Catherine. That's been absolutely fascinating. And like I say, you've explained everything. I think when I use the quotes, so I think it will really explain it to the general reader in a way that they'll be able to understand. So thank you very much indeed. That's been terrific. Just a couple of other things. Do you have a professional type photo that perhaps could be used with the piece, that maybe one that you might?
I love, obviously, we all need to self-promote.
Yeah.
I do have a professional photo from, I do. I mean, I have one from 2019 that was, professional photo. That's not too long ago. I have some that were my brother-in-law took of me. So they're a little bit, I have one with a bookcase in the background. Let me send you a couple, okay?
Yeah, that's great. Because they don't have they don't have to be taken obviously by a professional photographer. Just a nice portrait.
Quality. Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant.
Gotcha.
Oh, great. Thanks again. And yes, if I've got any questions when I'm writing the piece up, if you don't mind, I might send you another email. But
Of course.
And I'll certainly, when the piece comes out, I'll certainly make sure I send you the link to it. But thanks again for your time. Like I say, that's been absolutely fascinating, and I think it's quite a difficult topic to get to grapple with just for one article. But I think you've explained it in such a clear way, many of the issues, that I think will help enormously when I come to write the piece. So great to speak to you, and thanks again for your time. Great.
My pleasure. Have a really good day. Bye-bye.
Cheers. All the best. Bye. Bye.